and get started. Hey everyone, welcome to another Open Cluster Management Community Meetings. Today is the March 9th, 2023, and on the agenda today, we're going to talk about the ArgoCD pool model with the resource search integration. So I'm going to go first and talk a little bit about the pool model application propagation and the work that we did with the ArgoCD community. And then Jonathan will present next with the search integration to bring the resources that are deployed on the managed cluster, um, the status back to the hub. So quickly go over again what we're trying to accomplish with the ArgoCD pool integration. We're still on the hub cluster. We have the application set from the ArgoCD generate applications, and then once our application pool controller sees those, watches those application, it wraps them in the manifest work. And then on the managed cluster side, the Open Cluster Management agent will pull the application down to the managed clusters. And then locally on those managed clusters, the ArgoCD application will deploy those applications in a more decentralized way. Once the application is deployed, it has some status feedback back to the manifest work, and the manifest work will populate status back to the application. So the question here is how can we make the application stay dormant without scaling down the ArgoCD application controller? So in order to do that, we contributed the skip application reconcile annotation. When this annotation is enabled, which this annotation can be put in the application set template so that the application gets generated on the hub will have this annotation. When this skip annotation is true, is set to true, the application will skip reconciliation on the ArgoCD application controller. So as recommended by the ArgoCD community, we highlighted the primary use case is actually our OCM project using the pool integration controller that I just showed in the repo. And then there are some other alternate case that we discuss, such as like you can imagine the ease of debugging, orphan resources without deleting the application, and then kind of have like a dry run like application set, create dry run like application that don't reconcile automatically, etc., etc. But just want to highlight this, the alternative use case is not recommended, and it's mostly, this feature is mostly used for our OCM integration. So I'm gonna do a quick demo again on the propagation part, and then I'll hand it to Jonathan. So first up, I have the hub cluster on the left side. I have a managed cluster on the right side. It's registered to the hub cluster. I'm gonna apply my, let's take a look at the application set first. We can see in the application set, we have the labels pool to OCM managed cluster set to true with the, we got some feedback saying it should be under Open Cluster Management domain, so we did that. And then we have the new skip reconcile true. And then these annotation just shows which managed cluster will be deployed to once the templates gets moved. Sorry, was there a question?
Oh, sorry.
No problem. So once I apply this application set, we can see that the application gets generated, and it's already starting to bring some status back in from the managed cluster to the hub cluster. So once we do that, we can see that the managed cluster is now have the application deploy. We can check in the status. So in the status of the managed cluster, it's where it's populated with the full status. So the health, the sync, the results with all the lists of resources. So for scalability reason, using the manifest work API, the propagation is only taking a high level status feedback. So in this case, if we look on a hub cluster side, we can see the overall status is displayed, but not all the details are populated. So what I just shown, oh, sorry, can you guys see my screen? Oh, I'm probably not sharing the terminal correctly. Hold up, let me share the let me share my screen again. So I was doing this demo, and let me redo it. So I have on the left side a hub cluster with the managed cluster on the right side, registered to the left side hub cluster. Um, Again, let's take a look at the application set that I'm about to apply. So it's got the pull to OCM managed cluster, the domain name, openclustermanagement.io apps. We have the skip reconcile flag that we discussed, and then populate to a certain managed cluster in the namespace on a managed cluster. These will be filled once I apply the application set, and then it will generate the temp application that way. So once I apply the application set, you can see the app gets generated, and then on the managed cluster side, we can see that it's deployed successfully and applied successfully. And if we look at the status on the managed cluster side always obviously have all the details, but for scalability reason, we only bring back some of the status back into the hub cluster. So the overall sync status and the health status. So we got a question in the community recently. How do we see more of these statuses if on the hub cluster we only have the overall high level status? So that's something that Jonathan will go over. So what I show on the left, what I showed is the sort of like the left side, this portion of the architectural diagram. So the application set generates the applications, and then propagation controller propagate to the managed cluster and does the deployment, and then it brings back some of the status feedback. And Jonathan, if you're ready, you can talk a little bit about how we use the search add-on to bring more statuses back to the hub cluster.
Yeah, sure, Mark. Let me share my screen for that. Okay. So we add two new controllers to bring those statuses. So the first one we're going to look at is actually the resource sync controller. This controller runs alongside in the multi-cluster integrations pod. And so after the applications are propagated to the managed cluster, in order for us to build a report, we use this controller. And so every 10 seconds, it queries the OCM search API on each managed cluster to get all the applications to then build the YAML file for the application set. And this contains a list of resources deployed for the application. And in the case where the application failed to deploy, it would also include an error message. And with this YAML file that it builds, it saves it onto a volume on the pod that will be later used by another controller, the aggregation controller, to build the final application set report, which we will go some more over. Okay. This is a sample output actually from the search API for the mortgage application. So under the items section that we can look at, we have the information returned from search for the application. So there's a kind, the API group, API version, but there's a couple of properties, specifically the hosting resource section. It has three different parts: the kind, the namespace, and then the name. And so in this case, it has the application set in the OpenShift GitOps namespace and the name mortgage app set. And then there's a property just above that called the condition operation error. And this property contains an error message for the error type operation, but there could be other types of errors with this naming convention, such that there's a prefix of condition and a suffix of error, or also could be warning as the suffix. So basically condition, error name, and then error or warning. And then just below the items, we have the related section, and we have a list of the resources that are actually deployed for this application. So this is just an example of the output that we receive from search itself. And then the actual YAML file that we are creating by this controller has the following naming convention that we can show here, which is appset namespace dash appset name. And this is another example of the mortgage application set. So this is some of the information that we captured from search. So under the resources, we have the list of deployed resources that we retrieved from search. And then under that, we have the clustering conditions for each cluster. If the application fails to deploy, the error message and the type of error will be included for each cluster. And that is this is the application set YAML file that is produced that will be consumed by the aggregation controller that I'll look at next. Okay. And so this is another controller running in the same pod. And just like the resource sync controller, runs every 10 seconds to aggregate the YAML file generated by the resource sync controller, and also the status feedback in the manifest work from the propagation controller to generate a single, what we call a multi-cluster application set report for each application set. So the images I have there is just an example. On the left, the resources from the resource sync controller and the service and a namespace. And an example on the right is the status feedback that we would get from the propagation controller in the manifest work. And so this report is generated for each app set in the same namespace on the hub cluster and has the same corresponding name as the application set. So if we have BGDK app set as the application set name, we also have that as the report name. Okay. And going on to the actual multi-cluster application set report itself, we have three main parts for this, which is aggregating from the other two controllers. We have the health and sync status and error messages of the application on each cluster, the resources, and the overall summary from all managed clusters. So in the first section, we have the cluster conditions, is where the application is deployed on, and any status or error messages. In this case, there are none. Everything's healthy and synced. And then just below that, we have the resources that are deployed. And then lastly, we have the overall cluster summary section listing the number of clusters it's deployed to, and healthy or not, or in progress, or synced or not. I'm just going to do a quick demo showing the how this is aggregated into the report. Do that quickly. So should see my terminal here. And so I'm just going to show we have two application sets. And so we would expect two application sets to have two application set reports. And we hopefully, luckily do. So that's good. And we can just look at one of them. We can look at the actual report itself, and we can see that it has these cluster conditions, these resources, and the summary. And we can also show how it's built very quickly. So we can look at the manifest works, and we can go into, don't believe that's the right one. What is? And we can see how we got the health status and the sync status from the manifest work into the cluster conditions here. And we can do the same for actually figuring out how we get these resources and everything aggregated into one single report. So we can execute into the volume on the pod that is the resource sync controller saves the YAML file, and we can look at this YAML file and we can see how the file is getting it all. So we have all the resources here that we are aggregating, and that is just a quick demo of how the resource sync controller, propagation controller, and aggregation controller aggregates it all together into a single report. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was a really good demo. So with that, we can bring the resource status from the managed cluster, at least some of the information back to the hub cluster. And that sort of fills the other part of the puzzle when it comes to the ArgoCD pool model. Are there any questions regarding this work? Oh, another note we want to mention is the search API. It is open source, but we haven't brought it into the open cluster management community yet. Hopefully, it'll be done soon. And Josh, you have your hands up. Sorry, I didn't see it. Please go ahead.
Just so if in the community, if we don't have if you don't have search installed, will that aggregator still work?
Yes. So everything works exactly the same except for the status reporting. It's a little bit more limited, where it only shows the overall status that we displayed earlier. But otherwise, everything still works the same, exactly the same.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
So hi. So this is very cool. So how can I starting to try this one? Is there a dog, or there any plan to put a dog in the website or somewhere?
Yes. So this is a little bit tricky. So we have the propagation part, the ArgoCD pool integration. Let me share my screen. So under OCMIO GitHub org, we have the ArgoCD pool integration, and it talks generally about the propagation that I show in the first half of the presentation. It has steps on how to get started. So the only part is the skip reconcile flag on the ArgoCD. It's on currently it's only on the latest upstream. They haven't released it on the stable release yet. So that's why I was a little bit hesitant to add into our website yet. But once that ArgoCD is released their next release, I'm gonna add an entry to our website regarding how to do the pool model. But for now, follow the instruction on the ArgoCD pool integration to get started. For the second part of what Jonathan showed, I'm really hoping that we get the search API into the OCM org first before broadcast it further. But it was in the interest of the community. There was a question in the community about it. That's why I want to kind of demo some of the work that we have done. And maybe I will even bring this up to that community member and see if he can help us bring the search API into the community if he's willing to do that. So does that answer your question? Sorry, went on a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think one thing we could consider is to build this as a Helm chart and put into the OCM Helm chart repo. I'm not sure whether you will finally move this to the Argo project. But if not, possibly putting this to the OCM Helm chart repo will make it easier for user to use. There we actually have some GitHub actions to do that, so it won't be quite complicated.
Yep, I'll definitely move it. I'll move it. I'll create Helm charts and bring it over and upload it to the Helm. Thank you for that suggestion. And as for when are we planning to donate this this repo to Argo Project Lab? We're hoping to get some few users first. So once we have a few users using this controller, and then we can see their feedback, and then go from there.
Cool.
Any other questions? Comments? If not, thank you everyone for joining. Have a nice day. Take care.
Thanks.